Every empire believes military dominance will make them rich, control more territory, extract more resources, command more respect. But history reveals the opposite pattern. Military expansion doesn't generate wealth. It consumes it. And when empires try to maintain dominance through borrowing, they enter a death spiral that ends the same way every single time. Rome borrowed to pay legions defending borders they couldn't afford to protect. Within a century, the currency collapsed and the empire fell. Spain borrowed to fight wars on 4 continents. Within 80 years, they went from the richest nation on earth to a broken, second-rate power. Britain borrowed to win 2 world wars. Within 25 years, the empire was gone and the pound was worthless. The Soviet Union borrowed to match American military power. Within 900 days of showing weakness, the superpower ceased to exist. 4 empires, 4 collapses, the exact same 5-stage sequence. And right now, the United States is deep into stage 3. This is the story of how military spending doesn't just drain empires, it accelerates their collapse through a specific, observable debt cycle. And once you see the pattern, you'll understand why 36 trillion in debt and 850 billion in annual military spending isn't a policy choice. It's a countdown. Before we break down the 5 stages, you need to understand what makes military spending different from other government expenditures. When a government builds roads or schools, there's a return. Infrastructure enables commerce. Education creates productive workers. But military spending is pure consumption. Tanks don't generate revenue. Aircraft carriers don't produce goods. Soldiers consume resources, they don't create them. In peacetime, military spending is a tax on the productive economy. In wartime, it becomes existential. And when empires extend military commitments beyond what their economy can sustainably support, they face a choice: raise taxes, cut spending, or borrow. Raising taxes destroys the economy. Cutting spending means losing territory and admitting weakness. So they borrow, and borrowing works until it doesn't. Until creditors lose faith, until the currency collapses, until soldiers refuse to fight for worthless paper. That's the war debt cycle, and it has destroyed every empire that entered it. Let's start with Rome, the template for every imperial collapse that followed. At its peak in 200 AD, Rome controlled territory from Britain to Mesopotamia, from North Africa to the Rhine. 30 legions, roughly 150,000 soldiers plus auxiliaries, defended borders stretching thousands of miles. The cost was staggering. Military wages consumed 50 to 70% of the imperial budget. Stage 1, military expansion on credit. Rome's legions weren't defensive. They were instruments of conquest. Each new province was supposed to pay for itself through taxation and plunder. But by 200 AD, there were no more easy conquests. The empire had reached its maximum extent. The borders required constant defense against Germanic tribes, Persians, and internal rebellions. Revenue stopped growing. Military costs kept rising. And emperors started borrowing from the future. Stage 2, currency debasement to fund wars. The Roman denarius was the backbone of the economy. In 64 AD under Nero, it was 90 to 95% silver. Soldiers trusted it, merchants accepted it across the empire. But emperors discovered they could stretch their money by debasing the coinage. Mix in copper, reduce the silver content, keep the face value the same. By 200 AD, the denarius was 50% silver. By 260 AD, under Gallienus, less than 5%. It was bronze with a silver wash. Merchants noticed. They raised prices. Soldiers noticed. They demanded payment in gold or goods, not worthless coins. Inflation exploded. The currency that had held an empire together for 300 years became a joke. Stage 3, debt spiral. Here's where it gets catastrophic. Rome couldn't reduce military spending. Barbarian pressure was constant. If they pulled legions from the frontier, provinces would fall. But they couldn't raise enough taxes either. The economy was collapsing from inflation. Farmers abandoned their land to avoid tax collectors. Cities shrank. Trade declined. So Rome borrowed. They confiscated property from the wealthy. They forced loans from senators. They debased the currency even further to pay debts in cheaper coins. And they borrowed just to pay interest on previous borrowing. The debt spiral was locked in. Stage 4, loss of creditor confidence. By 270 AD, nobody would accept Roman denarii at face value. You could melt down a coin and the metal was worth more than the government claimed the coin was worth. That's the definition of currency collapse. Soldiers refused to fight unless paid in gold or granted permission to loot. Border provinces started minting their own coins, rejecting imperial currency entirely. Rome had lost the ability to project power because it lost the ability to pay for power. Stage 5, military and economic collapse. The 3rd century crisis. 235 to 284 AD nearly destroyed Rome. 50 emperors in 50 years, most were assassinated by their own unpaid troops. Provinces seceded, borders collapsed. The empire fractured into 3 separate states for a period. Emperor Aurelian managed to temporarily restore order in 270 AD, but the damage was permanent. The Western Roman Empire limped on for another 200 years, but it was already dead economically. In 476 AD, the last emperor was deposed, not by a conquering army, but because Rome couldn't pay Germanic mercenaries anymore. They just stopped showing up. The empire didn't fall in a dramatic battle. It dissolved when the money ran out. The math was brutal. By the end, it took 50,000 debased denarii to equal the purchasing power of 1 gold aureus from 200 years earlier. The currency had lost 99.998% of its value. Soldiers who once served for steady wages were reduced to bandits. The greatest military machine in history collapsed because the empire borrowed beyond its means and destroyed its own currency to pay the debt. Now let's jump forward 1,300 years to Spain. In 1550, Spain was the richest nation on earth. They'd conquered the Aztec and Inca empires. Silver mines in Potosi in Mexico were producing hundreds of tons annually. Spanish galleons brought treasure fleets home every year. King Philip II had more money than any monarch in history, and he spent it all on war. Stage 1, military expansion on credit. Philip II fought simultaneous wars everywhere, against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, against France and Italy, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England's navy, wars in the Philippines, wars in the Americas. By 1580, Spain had military commitments on 4 continents. The costs consumed 50% of royal revenue. And despite the mountains of silver flowing in from the New World, it wasn't enough. Stage 2, currency debasement. Here's the part people don't understand. Spain had unlimited silver, and it destroyed them. Because when you have unlimited money, you stop producing. You import everything. And you debase your currency to stretch it further. Spain started mixing copper into silver coins. The Spanish real, once pure silver, became 50% copper, then 75% copper by 1600. Face value stayed the same. Real value plummeted. Merchants across Europe stopped accepting Spanish coins at face value. They weighed them, tested them, rejected them. Inflation exploded inside Spain while Spanish silver flowed out to pay for imports. Stage 3, debt spiral. Philip II declared bankruptcy 4 times, 1,557, 1,560, 1,575, 1,596. 4 defaults in 40 years. Each time, he restructured debts and promised reforms. Each time, he went right back to borrowing and spending. By 1598, debt service consumed 40% of royal income. Spain was borrowing from Italian bankers, German bankers, anyone who would lend just to pay interest on previous loans. The silver from the Americas went straight to foreign creditors. None of it stayed in Spain. Stage 4, loss of creditor confidence. By 1600, Spanish troops in Italy and the Netherlands were being paid in IOUs, not coins. The Spanish crown issued bonds called asientos, promises to pay. Soldiers mutinied 45 times between 1570 and 1607, over unpaid wages. The most famous was the Spanish Fury in 1576. Unpaid Spanish soldiers in Antwerp mutinied, sacked the city, and killed over 7,000 civilians. Spain, the richest nation on earth, couldn't pay its own army. Stage 5. Military and economic collapse. By 1640, Spain lost Portugal. By 1648, forced to recognize Dutch independence after 80 years of war. By 1659, France replaced Spain as the dominant European power. Spain went from controlling half the world's wealth to a second-rate power in less than a century. The silver kept flowing from the Americas until the 1700s. But it didn't matter. The productive economy was dead. Spain had become a conduit. Wealth flowed through them to foreign creditors and import suppliers. Nothing stayed. The empire that thought unlimited money made them invincible learned the same lesson Rome did. Military spending funded by debt destroys empires, no matter how much gold and silver you have. Let's move to Britain. In 1914, Britain ruled the largest empire in human history, a quarter of the Earth's land surface, 400 million subjects. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. London was the financial capital of the world. And then came World War I. Stage 1, military expansion on credit. The cost of World War I was catastrophic. Roughly 35 billion pounds, about 1 trillion in today's dollars. Britain borrowed from everyone, mostly from the United States. By 1918, Britain owed America billions. The creditor had become the debtor. But they'd won the war. They kept the empire. They thought they could recover. Stage 2, currency debasement. The war had drained Britain's gold reserves. They'd shipped gold to America to pay for weapons, food, supplies. By 1920, reserves were half what they'd been in 1914. But Britain tried to maintain the pound's value anyway. They went back on the gold standard in 1925 at the pre-war rate. The problem? The pound was overvalued. British exports became too expensive. Manufacturing declined. Unemployment rose. The government had to keep interest rates high to defend the currency. This destroyed the domestic economy. Stage 3, debt spiral. Britain never recovered from World War I debt before World War II started. Another 120 billion in costs, more borrowing from America. By 1945, Britain owed the United States and Canada over 3.4 billion pounds, more than Britain's entire GDP. The war was won, but the empire was finished. They couldn't defend it anymore, couldn't afford it, couldn't maintain it. Stage 4, loss of creditor confidence. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The global reserve currency had just admitted it couldn't keep its promises. In 1940, 1 pound equaled $4.03. By 1950, $2.80. By 1970, $2.40. Steady decline. The reserve currency was dying. Stage 5, military and economic collapse. In 1947, Britain gave up India, the crown jewel, the source of wealth for 200 years. Gone. Over the next 20 years, they lost everything. Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean. By 1970, the British Empire existed only in history books. Britain tried to maintain the pretense. Permanent seat on the UN Security Council, nuclear weapons, special relationship with America. But everyone knew the truth. They were a former power. The empire was gone, and it never came back. The cost of winning 2 world wars was losing the empire that made them a superpower in the first place. Now, the most recent example, the Soviet Union. After World War II, the USSR emerged as a superpower. Nuclear weapons, massive military, control over Eastern Europe, satellites in space. For 45 years, they competed with America, and they spent themselves to death doing it. Stage 1, military expansion on credit. The Soviet Union spent 15 to 20% of GDP on the military, triple what America spent. They had to match American technology, American reach, American alliances, but their economy was a fraction of the size. Afghanistan, Cuba, Syria, Vietnam, North Korea, Angola, Ethiopia. Everywhere America had influence, they had to counter. The cost was unsustainable from the beginning. Stage 2. Economic stagnation. The Soviet economy stopped growing in the 1,970 seconds. Oil revenue kept them afloat, but nothing else worked. Factories produced junk. Farms failed. By the 1,980 seconds, the Soviet Union was importing grain. A country with some of the best farmland on earth couldn't feed itself. Stage 3. Currency collapse. The ruble was never a real currency. It couldn't be exchanged internationally. Even Soviet citizens didn't trust it. They used dollars when they could get them. The government had to buy foreign goods with gold and oil because nobody wanted rubles. By 1985, oil prices dropped. Gold reserves were depleting. They were running out of real money. Stage 4. Loss of creditor confidence. Western banks stopped lending. The Soviet government couldn't borrow anymore. They couldn't raise revenue because the economy was dead. And they couldn't cut military spending because that would mean admitting defeat to America. Stage 5. Military and economic collapse. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Eastern Europe left. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany, gone in a year. The Soviet government couldn't stop it. They were broke. On the 26th of December, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, 900 days from the Berlin Wall to complete dissolution. No war, no invasion, just economic implosion. The military couldn't be paid. The government couldn't function. A superpower with 30,000 nuclear weapons collapsed from internal economic failure. 4 empires: Rome, Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union. Different centuries, different ideologies, but the exact same 5-stage pattern. Military expansion on credit, currency debasement to fund wars, debt spiral, loss of creditor confidence, military and economic collapse. The sequence is mathematical, and it's happening again. The United States has over 750 military bases in 80 countries, troops deployed in 150 countries, committed to defending NATO, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Israel, Taiwan. Our military budget is $850 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. Stage 1, complete. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar became pure fiat. Since 2000, the money supply has increased 400%. Since 2020, we've printed over $6 trillion. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. Stage 2, complete. The United States owes $36 trillion. That's 120% of GDP. Interest payments are approaching $1 trillion per year. We're spending more on interest than on defense. We run deficits every year. We borrow to pay interest on previous borrowing. Stage 3, locked in. Stage 4 is loss of creditor confidence. We're seeing early signs. BRICS nations developing payment alternatives. Central banks buying gold at record pace. China and Russia trading in yuan and rubles instead of dollars. Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil. The cracks are forming. Stage 5 is collapse. And history says once you're in stage 3, stages 4 and 5 come fast. Not in centuries, in decades. The Soviet Union took 900 days. Britain took 25 years. Spain took 80 years. Rome took longer, but the pattern is the same. Now let's talk about what survived when military spending destroyed these empires. In Rome, soldiers demanded gold, not silver. Those who held gold auri preserved wealth, while silver denarii holders were wiped out. Wealthy Romans bought property outside the empire, in Germanic territories, in Persia, anywhere Roman tax collectors couldn't reach. In Spain, actual physical gold and silver retained value even as Spanish coins were debased. Spanish nobles bought estates in Italy, France, the Netherlands. Foreign property outside Spanish jurisdiction, merchants operating in Dutch guilders or German thalers, prospered while those holding Spanish vellon were destroyed. In Britain, those who shifted wealth to dollar assets in the 1940s and 1950s preserved purchasing power. Gold went from $20 per ounce in 1914 to $35 in 1934 to $800 in 1980. British citizens who moved wealth to America, Canada, Australia avoided the pound's collapse. In the Soviet Union, those who hoarded US dollars survived. Those who held rubles lost everything. By 1991, lifetime savings in rubles became worthless overnight. Those with access to Western banks, foreign property, or physical assets like gold survived the hyperinflation that followed. The pattern is consistent across all four collapses. Hard assets outside the collapsing system survived. Gold, silver, precious metals that cannot be printed or debased, foreign currency, especially the currency of the rising power replacing the dying empire. Real property in stable jurisdictions outside the empire's control. Productive capacity, skills, businesses that operate across borders. And early recognition. Those who saw the collapse coming and moved wealth before stage 4 hit preserved everything. Those who trusted the system until the end lost everything. During the 3rd century crisis, Roman gold retained purchasing power while silver lost 95%. During the Spanish collapse, gold remained stable while vellon lost 80%. During Britain's decline, the dollar became the reserve currency, while the pound lost 60% of its value from 1,940 to 1,970. During the Soviet collapse, dollars preserved wealth while rubles lost 99%. The United States is in stage 3. The debt spiral is locked in. 36 trillion in debt, 850 billion in annual military spending, 1 trillion in annual interest payments. 37% of all federal revenue goes to military and debt service. Rome crossed this threshold. Spain crossed it. Britain crossed it. The Soviet Union crossed it. And every single one collapsed. Maybe we'll find a way out. Maybe America can do what Rome, Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union couldn't. Maybe we'll cut military spending, pay down the debt, restore the currency. But the pattern says otherwise. The math says otherwise. And history, which has watched this cycle destroy 4 empires, says we're about to learn the lesson the hard way. If this opened your eyes to where we are in the sequence, subscribe. Because when stage 4 begins, when creditor confidence breaks, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future, they're written in the past.